Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
And now, the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton, sponsored by GEHA.
Welcome to the Federal Drive on Federal News Network. It's Thursday, November 20th. I'm your host, Terry Gerton, and I'm glad you're here. Coming up on this hour of the Federal Drive, two big opportunities are on the horizon for veterans. One to land a job, another to launch a business. Plus, what if we stopped fixing government at the margins and redesigned it from scratch? Those stories and much more ahead during this hour of the Federal Drive. We begin with this. A federal union is suing the Bureau of Prisons over the recent cancellation of its collective bargaining agreement. The lawsuit comes after BOP ended its contract in September, arguing that the union had become a, quote, obstacle to progress. The American Federation of Government Employees is now alleging that the agency's decision violated the law. Here with more, Federal News Network's Drew Friedman. Drew, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Terry.
Give us a timeline. How did all of this start, and how did we wind up here with a lawsuit?
This can all really be traced back to a series of executive orders from President Trump, one in March and then a second one in August, that essentially called on a majority of federal agencies to cancel their collective bargaining agreements for what he called national security purposes. Those orders were held up due to some legal battles earlier this year, but eventually in August, an appeals court overturned an injunction in the court in August, and that allowed some agencies to move forward since then with canceling their contracts. We've seen some agencies, not all, start to take these actions, but it's clear that, of course, the Bureau of Prisons is one of the agencies that has moved forward here. On September 25th, they were one of the agencies to announce that they would no longer be recognizing the union and that they were ending collective bargaining for more than 30,000 employees at the BOP.
Did the BOP give a rationale in that September announcement for why they were ending the contract?
They did, but it wasn't what necessarily was expected or laid out in President Trump's orders. So the president did, when he signed these executive orders, point to national security concerns and talk about a pretty narrow provision of a law from the 1970s for the reason behind being able to cancel these contracts. But the BOP director, when they announced that they were going to be taking away the collective bargaining agreement, talked more about how the union had become an obstacle to progress, as you mentioned, talked about that it was ending the agreement because it believed that collective bargaining was a roadblock to moving forward with the agency's efforts to change things under the Trump administration. So there was no real, allusion to the national security concerns as President Trump laid out. That's part of the rationale for the legal action that the union is taking now as well.
So tell us more about AFGE's lawsuit. What are their complaints or allegations?
So what it really boils down to here is a violation of two different laws. The first that they say has been violated is First Amendment rights. They say that the union has protected free speech to be able to speak out, for example, against the administration's actions. But similar to a lot of other lawsuits that AFGE has filed this year, this one says that it believes the agency retaliated against the union by canceling the contract, despite the union having its First Amendment rights guaranteed. The other allegation that's being made in this lawsuit is a violation of the Administrative Procedure Act. And what that says is, just at a basic level, that the BOP has to follow specific protocols when moving forward with this type of action. The union says that it didn't follow the exact procedures. For example, it didn't consider alternative options to canceling the contract and didn't really provide a compelling reason for canceling the contract. So now with this new lawsuit, this comes on top of another one that AFGE already has over agencies' actions more broadly canceling collective bargaining agreements. Now this additional lawsuit on the BOP specifically has gained support from AFGE National as well, but it is a separate lawsuit from what AFGE has already been trying to do for several months now.
Sounds like a really complex situation, and perhaps BOP separating itself in its explanation from the executive order opened that window.
That's right. It is a little bit of a separate issue. And I think one other thing to mention here, too, is that BOP was not one of the agencies that was outlined in President Trump's executive orders. There was some additional OPM guidance after those orders came out to say, these are the agencies we're focusing on for terminating collective bargaining. BOP was not listed there. And that may be another reason why this part of the union has moved forward with its own lawsuit.
It seems like this might be adding insult to injury for BOP employees. What else have they been going through this year?
There have been a lot of concerns that I've spoken with union officials on a number of occasions. They've talked about, how there have been really just ongoing staffing shortages and challenges, not just this year, but for many years for a lot of federal prisons. That's led to issues with morale, issues with overtime, and just being able to schedule enough work hours for the correctional officers. But this year, there were a couple of other instances that affected BOP employees. For example, the agency removed or sometimes in some cases reduced retention pay incentives for correctional officers, which the union says was, a move that's going to cause further staff attrition and further staffing shortages. Earlier this year, the agency also froze at least some of its hiring efforts due to what it said were budget issues. So there's a lot of just converging pieces here that are specifically, as the union has laid out concerns about multiple times, just going to lead to further staffing issues and further workforce and morale erosion for these correctional officers.
And that has a real impact on correctional officer mental health as well. We've talked about that in the past.
Absolutely. That's definitely been a concern for AFGE, for a lot of correctional officers. BOP has also consistently been ranked either at or near the bottom of the best places to work list for many years. So this is something where there have been issues this year, but it's been building for many years in a row in terms of the challenges that the agency is seeing.
Drew, what are you seeing with the union contracts at other agencies? Are there continuing litigations happening in other places?
There are. So there was that one overarching lawsuit that I mentioned from AFGE, but there are a couple of other smaller ones as well that are still pending. But as for where the collective bargaining agreements stand themselves, that just depends on the agency. We know of some others that have moved forward with terminating their collective bargaining agreements after that appeals court decision in August. So that includes the Department of Veterans Affairs, Department of Health and Human Services, EPA, FEMA, among several others. But of course, many others have not. So it's really dependent on how the agency has decided to proceed here. There's also more recently been progress with the Protect America's Workforce Act, which is legislation that's trying to reverse all of these efforts to take away collective bargaining rights. That recently in the House gained enough signatures on a discharge petition to move toward a floor vote. So I think we might see some progress, some action there as well, possibly pretty soon, depending on the House's schedule and everything.
That's Federal News Network's Drew Friedman. Drew, thanks for keeping us posted on this.
Thank you.
You can find her story at federalnewsnetwork.com. Up next, what if we stopped fixing government at the margins and redesigned it from scratch? This is the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Imagine entering the carousel of progress at Disney World. But instead of showing you the possibilities of life in the future, it showed you what a government of the future might look like. That's the aim of the Future State Initiative. In collaboration with the Federation of American Scientists, it conducted an exercise imagining what the U.S. government could look like in 2050. As you can probably guess, there were a lot of ideas, but many highlighted the hopes and wishes of now. To find out more about this project, Federal News Network's Eric White spoke with Lauren DeYoung-Schulman, Senior Advisor for Government Capacity at the Federation of American Scientists and a former Associate Director of Performance and Personnel Management at the Office of Management and Budget.
Lauren, thank you so much for joining us.
Eric, I am so excited to be here. This is the key question to me that we should all be thinking about and answering. certainly on a regular basis, but most urgently now, of rethinking what it is we want to design government around and how can we get there.
All right, so let's back up a little bit and just go to the project itself. How did this all come about, and what were you all hoping to obtain from it, and are you finding that you're getting some good ideas for that future government?
This project came about as I was leaving government and recognized that while we got a tremendous amount done in the Biden administration, there were a lot of things left on the table that I just realized we were not thinking big enough. We were doing incremental change around the margins because that's all that we thought was possible in some absolutely critical areas. Since then, we have seen the Trump administration come in and do some pretty significant radical transformations of government. At the same time, we are looking at the advent of artificial intelligence, the enormous challenge of climate change, and so many more big trends that are shaping how we think about governments. So I wanted to step back and say, all right, if all of this is happening anyway, if we could step back and say, how might we redesign government in the future to what we want it to be, not just based on where it is today and how we make changes on the margins, but around a set of principles that are work for us as Americans? How would we get both? What would that look like? What would it look like in practice? And then also, what are the ingredients that help us get there? And so with a project that I started with the Federation of American Scientists, we did a series of exercises over the summer that started with just that core question. Everybody sitting in a room, closing their eyes and saying, if you could design government around one thing by 2050, what would that be? And what change would you want that to bring about? And we use that visioning exercise to then go much deeper on not only what would that government deliver and how would that be different than today, but really critically, what are the ingredients that we need to help us get there? Not just magically we snap our fingers and it comes about, but what are the processes, the management ingredients, the organizations, the institutions that make that possible?
All right, so you host this discussion group, I guess, and it included up to 50 participants. Who was involved, and then we can kind of get into, and what was the process like, and then we can get into those ingredients that they did come up with.
Absolutely. So I lucked out by having a lot of people who were very passionate about the question, which to me was more important than having people who were specifically experts on the nitty gritty. But we had anywhere between people who've been thinking about government reform for their entire careers, whether that be around workforce issues, procurement, institutional design, to people who have been on the front lines of service delivery, think about how we do better disaster response or veterans benefits for Americans, to people who are themselves policy experts or organizers who have been thinking about how to bring better outcomes to their communities. And I really wanted to make this to be a diverse group who weren't just going to think in traditional increments like, well, let's make government more digital, which is great. Don't get me wrong. Or let's make government hiring better. All of those are great things. But wanted to shift the conversation around, if government was designed around a particular value, a principle, an organizing factor that drove everything, how we buy, how we hire, how we deliver for Americans, our relationships and our communication strategy with Americans, what would that look like? And really importantly, what trade-offs would that require? Because it's really easy. Some of us are natural optimists. Some of us are natural pessimists. It's really easy to think my idea will just make everything better, but almost certainly is going to come with trade-offs associated with it. And designing around those is that next level of criticality in terms of this whole process.
Yeah, I got to say, reading through the first summary that you all put out, somebody who covers this, not a lot of gov speak, which can be which can be almost as bad as corporate speak. Very plain language. It wasn't, hard to understand. So kudos to that and breaking things down and coming up with a group that, like you said, is knowledgeable, but not too far into the weeds. So let's do that here. Let's get into some of the ingredients that you all came up with, because that was one of my surprises that, you're thinking of an otherworldly future government. This is all stuff that is perfectly attainable and isn't going to require some major new innovation. That was at least my takeaway. I'm interested to hear what you have to say.
That was so striking to me as well. So we had over a few different workshops, we had groups that were thinking about what if we design around abundance? What if we design around equity or dignity? What if we were very place-based or focused on burden reduction? They had many different models and they all had really different ways that they went about the challenge. What was afterwards, I did, the usual researcher thing. What are the common themes we throw out? What is distinct? And what was really striking to me is that despite them going off in really radically different directions, a lot of the ingredients that they came up with that they said were crucial to the success of their models were both common, and I'll talk about those in a second, but also things that you look around today and say, like, all right, that fits into my model today too. And that said a few things to me is that one is that even if government in 2050 is just radically different and there's many different possibilities to get there, we can and should start working towards that we should be like the design of government, that it may be radically different at that point in time, has a lot of commonalities with the specifics that we may want to pursue today. So some of those common ingredients are things that are going to be very familiar to your listeners. So in terms of focus on talent, you need a workforce that is more flexible, where we are able to bring in different forms of talent on a different basis according to the needs of government. You need to be able to have different sorts of skill sets and roles in government, whether that be less oriented towards compliance or legal focuses and much more oriented towards delivery, community engagement, or design. In terms of procurement, there's a lot of interesting commonalities around wanting to make sure that we had specific kinds of talent and resources and capacities in-house in the federal government in order to allow more flexibility in terms of how that operated, and to be able to do so with public value in mind, and moving more towards outcomes-based contracting rather than some of the models that we see today. No surprise, a lot of interest in having better data, not only improving data collection, but having it be more seamlessly and securely accessible across problem sets. And that data was not just sitting in a silo somewhere, that it was able to deliver better feedback loops to policymakers to know, is what we're doing actually working overall? And on service delivery, all of my former customer experience colleagues will recognize a lot of these ingredients. People thought that the services designed by the federal government need to be far more frictionless, proactive, and available immediately for people who are in need. That there can be more one-stop shops where people are able to solve particular challenges on one website or one consultation rather than having to deal with multiple agencies. And the overall, our entire concept of government should be much more people-focused in terms of not only the design, so not just like the website you go to, but in terms of the intent, that you are starting with the outcomes for people and not just looking at the bureaucracies at hand. So none of those are like completely radical. And actually, I probably would have liked it if the groups got more radical. But it was striking to me how much all of those things are just as relevant to a government that is designed around something completely different than it is today as the government that we see before us at this moment.
We're speaking with Lauren DeYoung-Schulman, Senior Advisor for Government Capacity at the Federation of American Scientists. Yeah, one of my main takeaways from all of this as well was that the focus on having more in-house services rather than relying on contractors, and that would actually probably fix a lot of the things that you mentioned, having a one-stop shop, having more consistency in customer experience. This is a chicken and or the egg kind of thing, though, right? I mean, which can come first? Can you build a system within the government without, relying on several different contractors that are going to give you a sort of a hodgepodge sort of mix of services? Or do you have to rely on them first to help create that one-stop shop and, all government entity?
This is a great question. And I think it comes back to what I was wanting to relentlessly get after in these workshops, but also I would love all Americans to be able to think through is what is it we genuinely want government, and uniquely government, to deliver and provide for us, where that government is the one who is generating the value, that is understanding and building the process, and that is in charge of making sure that it delivers effectively for Americans. That doesn't mean that procurement or partnership doesn't exist. It's absolutely vital. But it's more thinking about it is more valuable for us to have a public orientation, an outcomes focus, a public sector mindset behind certain functions versus ones that are going to be more transient, short term, or not as consistently necessary for public services. And like that doesn't happen exactly as you say. That doesn't happen overnight. You have to start small or start with specific areas. You've seen this in previous administrations in thinking about how to integrate digital services into the federal government to be able to serve better as integrators and designers and technologists for federal systems. There may be other functions that we want to think about more actively in terms of where does it make sense to have government be the owner and driver and deliverer versus being partnering or relying on contractors on the outside. There's transitions with that. And it's also the sort of thing that may shift over time. But it comes back to this question of where is it that we want government to be responsible and accountable and have the internal skills to be able to know and manage these challenges versus they can reasonably rely on partners on the outside.
All right, so let's zero in on one particular thing hanging over all of this, and that's the advent of AI. It's here whether any of us want it or not, and supposedly it will make things more efficient and easier. That remains to be seen, but what is the role that you see in it playing overall in government services? I swear if you tell me I have to talk to another chatbot, I'm not going to be happy.
So I think here's something critical to understand for all of us is that we will absolutely, just like any other kind of software advancement, artificial intelligence is going to be a part of how we manage government and how citizens interact with government and how services are delivered and designed in the future. We need to have a better sense of where we are both comfortable with that, what are the values and norms associated with it, and where we're finding actual improvements for outcomes. And that requires some comfort with experimentation, piloting, and testing things out that government is not always great at. So it's going to have to get more comfortable with seeing where does this work, where does it not work. I think there's a lot of potential in artificial intelligence being able to take on functions that may be more rote and have potential for automation. Where I think that we want to be cautious is making sure that we are able to preserve public service, public servants in that outcome, citizen, American-focused, people-focused mindset, where AI may not be able to best implement, or AI may not be able to protect the rights and norms that we want to be associated with how we deliver government. It can be a great tool for burden reduction. It can be a great tool for being able to augment our workforce and free up a lot of the time that we want to be devoted to better things. But I also think it requires us being very purposeful around coming back to this question of like what government does versus what it doesn't. What is it we want public servants to take the lead on versus where we are comfortable with AI taking a burden away? And I think that is a great conversation to be able to have, probably not with a chat bot, but maybe to consult them would be interesting to see.
Yeah. Did the folks involved kind of take into consideration what the attitudes and feelings would be of the governed people in the future? You know, you talk about increased trust. A lot of people have a lot of distrust in AI right now. That probably will change as things progress and more folks get comfortable with it. I mean, I'm just curious if that came into play as you all were focusing on what people will actually desire from the government in the future as well.
Absolutely. So across all of the models that we generated, and they are summarized in a more recent publication that came out this morning on Blue Sky Thinking to Reimagine Government. Across all of them, a big part of our work was talking about what are the best possible world associated with this, but also what's the worst possible version of this, where things have gone terribly wrong. We have designed around abundance or AI or burden reduction, and we realized, no, actually, incentives have gone about the wrong way. We've also used that as an opportunity to think through first, second, and third order effects of what are the positive ones that may be associated with this sort of design model, but also potentially what are some of the negative ones or the ones that are not coming as naturally to us. We did that with the intent of trying to better understand the trade-offs associated with these models and also to try to think about what are the guardrails that we would want to set up if we worked towards designing around these goals. What's the talent we would need to bring in order to preserve the best possible versions? And how do we structure some of these management and operational ingredients that we're talking about such that the intent of these design functions are preserved, and we don't kind of move into more of a compliance model where we're trying to seek better outcomes. So you asked exactly the right question. In all of the models where people are thinking about different kinds of use of AI or data integration, some of the consequences they imagine were, if this goes wrong, then Americans will rightly question whether or not government is in place to secure their data privately, to manage their security, and to trust that government is the best integrator of this. So having those sorts of considerations up front, but doing so in a way that is both outcome focused rather than compliance focused, is going to be critical to any kind of redesign initiative.
Looking towards the future of your futurist project, what is it that you all have in mind right now? Like I said, I've only seen the very broad strokes that you painted out for us. What are you looking to do with this information that you've obtained, and any other future events that you have coming up or anything like that?
I think the biggest thing I'm excited about is expanding the conversation. So we had a wonderful series of events over the summer. I want to be able to take the conversation of what is it that we want from government and not want, because those are the same question, and broaden that to different audiences outside of DC, whether that be students, folks around the country, community groups, organizers, and others, to be able to drive a better conversation instead of what is it we don't like about government today, what bothers us, what's annoying, to what is it we want instead. So that's the next era of this. But then the second piece will be very critically all those building blocks that we talked about that are common for those 2050 visions. We're going to be working at FAS with our partners across the ecosystem to help make those more in reality today, whether that be talent or digital services or more burden reduction in government services. We can start that and are starting that at this moment. No matter what that government looks like in 2050, we have the ability to make progress today.
And I want to finish up here by kind of bringing the focus back to you yourself. You were in government. You saw how the sausage was made. Now you're on the outside kind of taking a more observational approach. Are you optimistic? Should we be optimistic here, Lauren? Are there, a lot of the stories that I get to report on daily are, Inspector General reports on government failures. What is there to be hopeful for?
I think there are two things that I'm hopeful about. One is that I think there's an entire generation of leaders who are excited to look at the potential of government as a deliverer of opportunity and a manager of risk that nobody else can. And it's less that those leaders didn't exist before and more that so many of us are seeing this as like, this is the moment that we need to be able to take this challenge on. The second thing I'm excited about is for all the changes that have taken place in government over the last 9 months, it's made Americans much more aware of what government does in their day-to-day lives, what it doesn't do, and hopefully gotten them to think more about this question that drives me, which is what is it they actually want out of it? I want, for all that there's been some challenges over the last several months, I want to use that as an opportunity to get a better national conversation going. That gives me hope.
Lauren DeYoung-Schulman is Senior Advisor for Government Capacity at the Federation of American Scientists. Thank you so much for joining us and having this great discussion.
Thank you.
And we'll post this interview along with a link to more information at our website. Go to federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. You can also subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts.
Still to come, when paychecks stop and tax season looms, what moves should federal employees make? But first, two big opportunities are on the horizon for veterans, one to land a job and another to launch a business. You're listening to The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Disabled American Veterans is stepping up with a nationwide virtual job fair on November 25th and its next Patriot Boot Camp for veteran entrepreneurs in February 2026. These initiatives aim to help veterans and military families find meaningful work and build thriving businesses. Here with more on these two programs is Dan Clare, DAV's Chief Communications and Outreach Officer. Dan, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
I want to start with a big picture question, because the last few months of downsizing in the federal workforce and the ramifications that has had on contractor workforces have really had a significant impact on military veterans and military spouses. Can you help us understand why those groups are so vulnerable in those particular sectors to downsizing?
Absolutely. I mean, veterans comprise a large percentage of the federal workforce. So there is some preference given to disabled veterans, veterans who have certain decorations from their service if they've been on campaigns and things like that. And there are federal set-asides as well for government contractors. There's a lot of disabled veterans, particularly who are working for the federal government. And those folks, some of them faced a fork in the road. Some of them have been furloughed for a long period of time. Some of them are looking for different career opportunities now that the government doesn't seem maybe as steady as it used to be. So we're hearing from a lot of veterans who they're just looking at other opportunities, basically. And some of them have been without work for a good while. So we're helping them out. And then on the contracting side, both as employees and as business owners, veterans are disproportionately affected by interruptions in contracts, by government shutdowns, all those sorts of things.
And the federal government had a special hiring authority for military spouses, correct?
And it's a great question because military spouses are always disadvantaged. They're always, they're sacrificing for our country alongside their loved one, whether that be a man or woman. And those folks, the portability of their careers is very important to them. So for them having opportunities in employment, having opportunities to have a business that they can take with them as they go along their journey, those are both very important things for them.
How is DAV engaged in the veteran employment space? That might not be the first place that folks would expect the Disabled American Veterans Group to be involved.
You would think, but going back 100 years, DAV has been around for a long time. That was one of the original issues that we faced from World War I veterans coming home. Veterans who are changed as a result of their service, they're at a disadvantage sometimes when they're looking for jobs. So DAV getting involved, we've always advocated for employment opportunities, programs, services for veterans. But this is a chance for us to connect veterans directly with employers who want to hire them, who recognize the unique skills and talents that they bring. So we're so proud as an organization to be able to partner with these employers who recognize that value, and they're making it a serious effort to hire and retain veterans.
What are some of the lessons you're learning through that involvement about today's employment market? What are big opportunities? What are employers looking for, and how do veterans fit in?
Well, I think one of the things we tell veterans frequently is that you're in military service and you might have a job specialty or an occupational specialty that doesn't seem like it translates particularly well to civilian life. Some do, if you're a firefighter in the military, being a firefighter or a crash crew rescue guy on the civilian side lines up pretty nice. But we find that there are a lot of soft skills and real talent and job experiences that veterans have that help them out a lot. So we're talking to all industries right now when we're talking about our employers. And there are so many different positions that they offer and so many different talents that veterans bring. I mean, people think about maintenance, aircraft maintenance, they think about logistics, but there's great management opportunities. There's people who've worked with budgets in an operational environment. There's all kinds of different reasons why veterans are uniquely suited to be resilient as job searchers.
I'm speaking with Dan Clare. He's Chief Communications and Outreach Officer at the Disabled American Veterans. Dan, DAV is hosting a nationwide virtual job fair next week. Tell us about that.
It's a virtual career fair. These are awesome events. You're going to find some great opportunities there. We have AT&T, Department of Energy, Wells Fargo, Border Patrol, Discount Tire. Those are some of the top level companies who we think of, they have names that are pretty recognizable to most of us, but there are a lot of other employers who are going to be there. And you, as a veteran or a spouse who is looking for a job, you might think, well, I'm not going to work in the waste management industry because I'm disabled. And for me, hiking trash cans isn't going to be a career for me. But you have to recognize that all of those companies have different opportunities and different positions within them that might be a perfect fit for a veteran's experiences so far.
What helpful hints would you have for veterans and military spouses who are interested in participating? How can they best prepare?
Well, having a good resume is very important. If you going in advance and looking at the job fair, there's a page there. You can look at the types of positions that are out there and kind of earmark some opportunities specifically. And if you can then tailor a resume a little bit more towards what the requirements are of that position. So those are important things. Veterans know how to dress nice, fortunately. So we have that going for us. You should look great going into it. And then developing a little bit of a pitch for yourself, an elevator pitch where you say, this is who I am. This is what I'm about professionally. This is the kind of opportunity that I'm looking for. And this is what I hope to do through that opportunity for the company I work for. That's some of the advice that we're giving veterans to prepare.
And not every veteran wants to work for someone else. Many of them want to start their own business, and DAV has a program, the Patriot Boot Camp, to help veterans understand how to start a business. Tell us about that.
It's an incredible program. It's cohort-based. It's 2.5 days of very intensive training. We're going to talk to you about, you're going to be able to talk and interact with people about funding, which is one of the biggest shortfalls for veterans as entrepreneurs. We're going to talk about team building, sales, marketing, branding, and you're going to get mentorship. You're going to get about 4 hours of mentorship with CEO level professionals who can help you. And they're driven because they want to help you avoid making the mistakes that they might have made earlier in their careers. And these people will fly across the country to be there with us. Our next event is February 11 through 13 in Myrtle Beach. And I encourage people to travel for these events because sometimes as an entrepreneur, when you're closer to home, it's impossible to avoid some of the details and things that you need to work on for your venture. So February 11th through 13th, this is a free opportunity, and we want to get as many veteran entrepreneurs and spouses involved as possible.
Do you give folks a real taste of the challenges of entrepreneurship? I mean, it's not the easiest way to move forward.
No, it's extremely risky. By definition, being an entrepreneur is being a risk taker, and we recognize that. And we recognize, too, not all of these ventures are going to succeed, but the veterans having the experience getting involved, we find they're naturally resilient. They're creative. They're good at strategy, good at planning. There are just some areas every veteran entrepreneur seems to have where they're an A+ across the board, and then when it comes to marketing or sales, maybe they're a D-. So we can address that there. And also they walk away with the community. They walk away. Each cohort is its own network, and that includes all of the mentors who participate. So we're really excited. What this does to transform a veteran's life and make them someone who hires people is extremely exciting for us. And we're always looking for mentors, always looking for veterans who want to get involved. And it's extremely meaningful to be involved with.
What message do you have for employers or business leaders who want to get involved from the hiring side in these activities?
I mean, it's accessible to you too. I mean, hiring veterans, the people who come to these career fairs, we have them there all the time. Tons of veterans coming through all the time. They tell us that the value is there. The reason why they're there isn't, yes, they want to do the right thing. They're patriotic. They believe it's the right thing for America to hire veterans, but they're also making a good deal. They're finding people who are already trained or trainable. They're finding people who are disciplined, who show up on time. They're finding people who are great team workers and abnormally loyal to companies and institutions that they get involved with. It makes good business sense for you to hire veterans. If you visit our website, jobs.dav.org, we have an employer resource there where you can kind of validate that decision or make that decision if you want. We have a recognition program called the Patriot Employers Program that you can access where we're actually going to help you recruit because you're going to be able to show veterans with a digital seal that it's something that you're focused on. So there are a lot of great ways to get involved. Hiring veterans is good for you and it's good for our country.
For veterans and military spouses who might be interested in participating either in the job fair or in the Patriot Boot Camp, where do they go to find out more?
You can find more at jobs.dav.org. There's all kinds of stuff on there, so check it out. You can hear about success stories, hear about things that are working for other folks, and just visit us. That career fair, November 25th, that virtual career fair could change someone's life. So we want to get as many people involved as possible.
I'm speaking with Dan Clare. He's Chief Communications and Outreach Officer at the Disabled American Veterans. Dan, thank you so much for sharing these opportunities with us.
Terry, thank you so much for having us and for your concern for the welfare of veterans nationwide.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. Coming up next, when paychecks stop and tax season looms, what moves should federal employees make? This is the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Smart tax planning happens in November, not April. Private wealth advisor Tiago Glieger explains to Federal News Network's Eric White why federal employees earning over $145,000 face a major TSP catch-up contribution change in 2026. Also, how borrowing from TSP beats credit cards during financial hardship, and what tax-saving strategies now can reduce next year's bill.
We're talking about the new ORA system, or I guess, is it ORA system? I'll let you correct my pronunciation for federal retirees. Obviously, that system is going to get used a lot over the next coming months. If what has been happening recently is any sign of what's to come. Tell me about what's going on with this system and what feds are saying, the ones that have been using it have been saying about it.
Yeah, Eric, this new system, so we call it ORA. I think that's how most people are calling it, as you said. So this is a brand new system. And honestly, it's been confusing a lot of people. Okay, it's replacing the old paperwork that a lot of federal employees had to fill out, the SF 3107, as they were going to retire from their agencies. But I think the big problem here, Eric, is they're finding that a lot of the HR departments are just simply overwhelmed, right? We had a lot of people that were leaving. We have bottlenecking of a lot of people that are leaving on DRP as well. And so they just can't provide the kind of support that they used to before. So a lot of these questions start to pile up. It's a brand new system, and there's not enough people in place to help answer those questions. Retirement is already a pretty stressful process for people, right? So then on top of that, not having a clear process or information about a new system only adds to the anxiety. And so when it was first launched, everyone hoped that OPM was going to say, this is going to be faster, it's going to be smoother, it's going to require less people. And OPM actually said the opposite. They said at first, it might actually take longer. Okay. They are very hopeful that over time, this is going to be a good system. But right now, there's a lot of moving parts that have to come together for all of that efficiency to really start showing up. And as you guys have seen, Eric, there's tens of thousands of federal employees retiring. We just had the first wave here on 9/30. We're going to have another wave here on 12/31. And so it's really, really tough for people to get answers to the system.
Yeah, sort of ready, fire, aim approach that we love here in the USA. Walk us through what a federal employee should expect when they decide to retire under this new system. What are some of the major changes from the old system? Not that anybody retires more than once, hopefully, but what exactly are they looking at from a landscape perspective?
Yeah, so what it used to be is that a lot of agencies would run the GRB platform retirement estimator for federal employees retiring. And the GRB platform was effectively a repository of your federal service, and it would give you information on what retirement could look like, estimates of your pension, things like that. So then we run into problem number one. A lot of agencies cut GRB. So now federal employees are saying, well, what does my retirement estimate look like? How many creditable years do I have? That system is no longer there. So then agencies are not even able to provide that information. But presuming you're still going to move forward with the actual retirement process, first step is you have to notify your HR office that you're ready to retire, right? You can send them an email generally and say, I believe I'm eligible. I'd like to start the retirement planning or the retirement process. And this is because the HR group has to initiate the ORA system in most cases. Every agency has a little bit of a different process, but this is what the majority of the groups are doing, okay? You have to remember what's different here is now HR is swamped. There's tons of people retiring. There's less of them around to be able to do this, which is causing some of the bottleneck. Once HR begins the ORA process, you're given access to it. And again, this is going to replace the SF 3107, which is the retirement form. And so now it's actually easier because instead of filling out a government form, you're just going through a system online and it's asking you questions one by one. Everyone has filled out those kinds of forms before. So it's actually pretty easy, as we've seen with some of our clients. And what it does is it takes your answers and pre-fills the form for you, which is a nice service, okay? Once you submit that part, it's really important that a federal employee stay alert, because a lot of times HR, they may kick it back if they need additional information. There's something that's missing. So you have to check to make sure you have it. You have to check to make sure you don't need to do additional work on the ORA system for that. That's when it moves to payroll. Once it moves to payroll, they finalize all of your hours, which can take a month to a month and a half just at payroll itself before it goes to OPM. So if you think about it, we're talking a month at payroll, could be a month before HR actually gets around to being able to initiate the system for you. We're at 2 months so far. Once it hits OPM, that's when the official clock starts, as OPM likes to describe it. Okay, and there's some uncharted waters here because OPM has not really handled A, this new system before, and B, this many federal employees retiring all at the same time. So they release information. There's some congressional report that gets put out there that talks about how many applications are coming into the system and what is the average processing time month over month. We've been seeing that go up and up and up over the last 3 months. I expect it's going to continue to get worse, right? So we're talking 3 months at the agency level plus whatever time OPM is going to need for themselves.
We're talking with financial planner Tiago Glieger. So other than those long timelines, well, we can call them unknown timelines, as you say, what are some of the other issues that federal employees are seeing so far with the system? It sounds like it is going through some growing pains, but are there any fundamental flaws with it that people are just not liking?
I think some of the challenging questions that the system asks them are things like, how much withholding do you want to do on your taxes? Or what do you want to do about life insurance? And before, there were some guidance in the forms and how to be thinking about some of these things. The system is a little bit more streamlined, and it just asks you the question. Well, if you haven't gone through the process of creating a financial plan, how do you know how much insurance do you need? What kind of tax liability are you expected to have? So federal retirees are called upon to make these decisions in real time as they're filling out the form, and they don't really have the information to be able to answer those questions. Okay. The other issue that we are running into, and this one hasn't been too much, is that sometimes people don't get the notification of additional action that they need. Sometimes it gets stuck in their spam email. So this is something that, again, it's those bumps that they're trying to pull together. There are a lot of systems in the background that have to coordinate with each other. And as any brand new system that gets launched, there's always stuff that's going to break. So I'm sure some of that's going to be a problem too.
Gotcha. All right. And so what can folks do if they are looking to retire? You're a financial planner. I guess we're talking to the right person. How can they financially prepare for any delays that might occur because, some of those dates don't line up and, you don't want to be caught in between paychecks, as they say, and without anything coming in. What sort of precautions can those looking to retire take?
Yeah, that's a really good point, Eric. I think the first thing that federal retirees should remember is that you will get your annual leave lump sum. Okay, so that comes pretty quickly in our experience with clients right after you leave. So you get your final paycheck, and then shortly thereafter, you get your lump sum. So depending on how many hours you have, you're going to get a big check that's going to help you to meet your expenses between when you leave and no longer have an income and when the pension actually fully starts. There are also, in most cases, an interim payment where it's a portion of your final pension, not the exact amount. But again, we don't want to count on that because there's cases where people don't get it. So the biggest thing is that, let's say you're planning to retire at December 31st. Now is the time to start boosting your cash reserves. So what do I mean by that? Cash in the bank is going to be really important here. So this might mean, and it sounds a little counterintuitive, but might mean maybe don't put as much in the thrift savings plan for the rest of the year if you know you're going to retire, okay? Yes, you have access to the TSP if you are retiring within a certain age. The age is 55 for most people. But cash in the bank is that much easier to access, okay? It's already been taxed in most cases. So if you reduce your TSP contribution, that means your take-home pay goes up and you get to start accumulating that cash. I would also think about what kind of expenses maybe you have coming up, right? The general guide for people is we like around 6 months worth of your monthly expenses in cash in the bank at all times. And because we might be looking at delays on your pension starting, you might want to increase that a little bit more. So if you got big renovations you were planning to do on the home. Maybe postpone that for a little bit until you get greater clarity around OPM's timeline for this stuff. And the last one, and this one's a little bit controversial as well, but it depends on how old you are. If you leave prior to the age of 55, which a lot of people have done this year, you technically don't have access to the TSP funds unpenalized, unless you are law enforcement or special provisions, 1811s, things like that, right? So what you can look at is a potential TSP loan. You can get up to $50,000, and that comes without that 10% early withdrawal penalty, which is kind of nice because you can put that in your bank account, use it or don't use it, but at least it creates extra cash flow for you, okay? Of course, check with your financial professionals, make sure that this is something that is feasible within your plan, but that's been a really solid one to help bridge people over.
Uncertainty is the word of the day for a lot of federal employees, particularly those that are retiring even so. Any advice on handling that aspect of things? You're already going through the anguish of entering into a new stage of your life, having all of this in the background of shutdowns and potential furloughs and things of that nature. What can you tell people that are going through this right now?
I would say for folks to rely on your planning. This is something that creates great peace of mind, just knowing what you're going to do in which scenario. So if this happens, if it takes longer, if the markets crash in the middle of your waiting for your pension, all of these things, if you can think ahead of what those potential problems may be and what you're going to do if those things happen, or what you're going to do in preparation to hedge some of those risks, that gives you great peace of mind. Okay. We have to be careful about watching the economy and the news around the markets. The markets are very volatile, and you always have different opinions and people talking about what the markets are going to do next. We have to be careful because that creates a lot of anxiety for retirement. And I think, too, the more information you have, the better. OPM has a really, really helpful retirement quick guide, which, we can give you guys the link, and I'm sure you guys have this already. You can put it in the show notes. But the OPM retirement quick guide is super helpful. It walks you through the process so you know what to expect. And in fact, there is one additional resource that is actually your benefits officer directory. This is something that OPM maintains pretty regularly, and it's the HR person in charge at your office. In case the process is just stuck, and if you can't get answers, you can't get anywhere, this is a place you can look for to find out who's in charge at your agency to get the answers you need.
Tiago Glieger is private wealth advisor with RMG Advisors. Thank you as always.
Thanks, Eric.
A government watchdog is sounding the alarm about a growing national security threat, one that comes from the everyday digital traces service members and their families leave online. A new Government Accountability Office report warns that publicly accessible data, from social media posts and location tracking to routine Defense Department press releases, can be pieced together by bad actors to identify military personnel and disrupt military operations. GAO says the Pentagon has taken some steps to address the threat, but its efforts remain scattered and lack coordination. For more, Federal News Network's Anastasia Obis spoke with Joe Kirschbaum, director of the Defense Capabilities and Management Team at GAO.
We did the study in response to the Congressional Defense Committee's interest. They really wanted us to help them find out where the Department of Defense was on this kind of diverse threat, this threat of publicly available information. It's different from cyber threats itself and in the individual parts of information security. Obviously, the department deals with that stuff all the time. But this is wide enough and broad enough. And although we were looking at in response to the Armed Services Committees, looking at the military, this is also an issue that affects absolutely everyone in society. So it's a much broader issue. And the Congressional Defense Committees wanted to get a sense for where the department was on this. We've done work before on topics similar to this. So, for example, like the Internet of Things and potential weaknesses and vulnerabilities of that. And we found that the department they recognized that there were security issues, but they weren't necessarily well prepared to respond to them because it was new, because it didn't necessarily neatly fit into existing organizational structures or policies or doctrines. And that's a consistent story with the department. So that's why the defense committees were really interested in us following up on this.
Could you walk us through an example of how a bad actor could identify service members using publicly available information, how that information can be exploited, and what types of security risks that creates?
one of the things we did was we used some of the data that we were able to find publicly available and kind of created notional threat scenarios. And the one that you mentioned was threats from personal information to DoD personnel or potential risks. And so one of the things we did, we started to look at what information might be out there. We did that in several ways, one of which is to generally what kind of information is available. We also did the next best thing to creating our own version of a potential threat profile. In other words, we had our own investigators. These were qualified investigators that actually go to the web, and they all actually also looked at the deep web and the dark web to find potential information that could be available. And what they found was that in addition to the basic tweets and Facebook posts and things like that are commonly out there, you don't have to dig very far into those other portions of the web to find things such as data brokers selling information on DoD members and their family, personal information, operational information. And once you start putting some of these things together, potentially, you start to see patterns, whether it's looking at individuals, whether it's the individuals linked to military operational units or operations themselves, family members. And so nefarious actors can take these things and build them into a profile that can be used for nefarious purposes.
You focused on OSD and DoD components' efforts to mitigate security risks and threats and protect personal information from exploitation. What did you find there?
So this was, as I mentioned before, this is a kind of a common story that what we found in the past. And it goes, the story basically is that the Department of Defense recognizes many of the issues that we found as potential risks. And this is not uncommon for them to recognize that there are dangers of people posting too much information. So this is the kind of thing that several disciplines in the department have long recognized. So for example, the people that do what's called operations security in the department, that's the safety and security of DoD operations. It's the old loose lip sink ship idea. Anything that may potentially compromise the military operation is of importance and worth consideration. So we looked and we talked with people that deal with operation security. We looked at several of the other security-related enterprises and organizations in DoD, the people that do, for example, counterintelligence, that do force protection, which is kind of what the old term for anti-terrorism force protection, kind of protecting against attacks, insider threat programs, what's called mission assurance, making sure that military programs, equipment, whatever, can continue to run if attacked, and also some other areas like protection of critical program information related to contractors and DoD systems. We looked at all of those to see how they treated this issue. And the answer in general, except for the operations security folks, the answer was they didn't really consider these kind of publicly available information in their own sphere. It's not like they didn't recognize there was an issue, but it was more like, oh, yeah, that's a problem, but I think it's handled in these other areas. Almost like passing the buck. They didn't understand necessarily where it was handled. And the answer was it should probably be handled collectively amidst this entire structure. Now, the good news for the Department of Defense is this loose structure of security disciplines, they coordinate, they collaborate, and they do it regularly and they do it well. They have the kind of structures we would want to see in terms of coordination and risk management. They understand how to assess problems, collectively assign responsibilities to deal with them, to develop action plans. And from our perspective, the biggest bang for the buck, assess those action plans and see if they're making progress and then make changes. They've got that structure. So there was a good news, bad news story. The rest of the bad news story is we did not see where this particular issue of the threats and the vulnerabilities of publicly available information is adequately incorporated into their collective understanding.
Just like you said, DoD has identified the public accessibility of digital data as a real and growing threat. But again, action remains limited. And in your conversations with them, how do they explain the gap? Is it just like you said, oh, someone else is handling that?
I think in a large degree it is that it's a tendency. It's kind of like I've always said in the cyber world, there's a huge, enormous cultural aspect of it. It's not just technology. It's not just security policies. And by cultural, I mean, once again, we're talking about the military, but this goes for everyone in society. The cultural aspect is that everyone, absolutely everyone, is responsible for cybersecurity. And in this case, absolutely everyone is responsible for information and digital security. It's a matter for the department to help convince everyone of that, whether it's individual responsibilities. Now, these disciplines that are responsible for doing that, they have to take on the burden of ensuring that culture gets energized, as it were. And so what we've seen in the last several years, and I'll use the example that I talked about a few months ago about the Internet of Things. So we issued a report in 2017 about some of the threats and vulnerabilities of some of these systems like Fitbits and things like that that are transmitting data. And from the Department of Defense's perspective, well, that data is not transmitted on a DoD network, so it wasn't necessarily considered a threat. And our response was, well, are you concerned that that information might be used by an adversary? And so people like the operations security folks, they did recognize that was a potential issue. So, and in 2018, there was the revelations that those Fitbits were in fact being allowed to track military personnel at facilities overseas in the United States. So DoD very rapidly came out with regulations that governed how Fitbits were supposed to be used and what parameters they could be used by military personnel. So that's a good example of the fact that they could respond rapidly, but it's also an example that it's reactive. When there's an issue, they can respond. What we're trying to see is that next level of thinking about this as a holistic issue. Where does this challenge fit across those security disciplines? Because the truth is the technology changes all the time and it changes rapidly. It's probably going to change faster than you can react to it. So thinking about it a little more proactively is probably a good idea.
In the report, the officials cited that the Secretary of Defense's 2025 priorities, like reviving warrior ethos, rebuilding capabilities, deterrence, etc., as the reasons why digital profile risk hasn't been elevated. From GAO's perspective, how does digital profile risk actually fit into the same priorities?
One of our perspectives on this is we know we're not sure where you would put this topic in terms of those priorities. I mean, this is a pretty clear case where it's a threat to the stability and efficacy of our military forces. So that kind of underlines all priorities. You can't necessarily defend the homeland with forces that have maybe potential operational security weaknesses. So it would seem to kind of undergird all of those priorities. So that's kind of way I think we would view it. We also respect the fact that as the department's making tough choices, whether it's concentrations of policy, financial, and things of that nature, they do have to figure out where the most immediate ways to apply dollars. So, for example, if we're asking the department really to look across all those security disciplines and more thoroughly incorporate these threats in that existing process, the extent they're going to have to make investments in those, they do have to figure out what needs to be done first and where this fits in. So that doesn't negate that, but I would think this would be a consideration for the broader military about how they're able to affect all of those priorities.
That's Joe Kirschbaum, Director of the Defense Capabilities and Management Team at GAO, speaking with Federal News Network's Anastasia Obis. You can find her story at federalnewsnetwork.com. The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton is produced by Eric White and Michelle Sandiford. Our web editors are Daisy Thornton and Stephanie Wright. For the latest updates, stay with federalnewsnetwork.com or follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. I'm Terry Gerton. Thanks for listening.